An administration officer at the MSF hospital in Kunduz, Faizullah recalls the night of horror when he thought he was going to die under the deluge of bombs. He sees the patients and his colleagues, decapitated, burnt alive in their beds, directly targeted as they attempted to escape the buildings in flames. Faizullah hid in this corner with a doctor, who died just a few minutes later.
I tried a lot to take his dead body out of the site not to prevent him from burning, but it's the only thing that really hurts me. That he died, and after that he burned, and everybody burned.
The US Army immediately took responsibility for the attack, and the President of the United States apologized to Médecins Sans Frontières.
MSF's first reaction was to keep the door open by calling for an inquiry to establish how it could have been possible for an American plane to bomb an MSF hospital for over 1 hour and to kill 42 people.
In April 2016, the American Army released the findings of its own investigation. It concluded that the attack on the hospital in Kunduz was the result of a series of errors. Their report tells us that the US military considered that all civilians had fled Kunduz and only the Taliban remained, which in effect turned the whole town into hostile territory. The hospital was supposedly mistaken for a military target, an error caused by a cascade of human and technical failures. So the hospital in Kunduz was bombed by mistake, a version of the facts that is contested by MSF, which considered that this was no cascade of errors, but rather a cascade of conscious decisions for which the hospital paid an extremely heavy price.
Ce concept de légitime défense préventive appliqué à toute une partie d'une ville.
The concept of preventative self-defense applied to a whole area of the town, which they had decided to recapture militarily, led to all-out war there. Their assumption that it was an open battlefield and that the civilians who were left couldn't just be civilians, they had to be combatants, militants, and that anything that continued to function had to be direct material support for those combatants.
At the time of the attack, the town of Kunduz had just been captured by the Taliban, which triggered a counter-offensive by the Afghan military with backing from US forces. The day of the airstrike, the hospital was providing care to 105 patients, some of them disarmed fighters. At the beginning of October, Médecins Sans Frontières' international president addressed the members of the United Nations Security Council 5 months after the adoption of the resolution supposed to guarantee protection of civilians and medical care in times of war.
In an age where counterterrorism shapes war, a license to kill has been issued. We call on you all, again, to revoke this license. Revoke it, whether or not your enemies are receiving the medical care that you attack. Because throwing medical impartiality to the wind is also becoming a new norm of warfare.
A building gutted, windows blown out by bombs, stretchers half hidden in rubble and dust. This is all that's left of this hospital in eastern Aleppo. On October 1st, relentless bombing raids by Syrian and Russian forces wiped out its operating theatres and patient rooms, reducing still further the chances of survival for the war-wounded who day after day keep pouring in. Here are the few drugs left in the pharmacy at one of the rare hospitals that continue to function. How can patients be cared for in such conditions? Medical teams in the 8 hospitals supported by MSF in eastern Aleppo are forced to make unbelievably difficult decisions.
We are under siege, so we have to deal with all the patients that we receive. We are seeing severe brain injuries we simply can't manage. Whatever you try to do, it won't help. You wait for 5 minutes while they die without being able to do anything to save them. I think that with less work and less use of the supplies we have, we can hold out for 3 months. But if the bombing continues at this intensity, I think we won't be able to carry on for more than a month or 6 weeks.
Since 2011, the people of Syria have known nothing but war. It's estimated that 250,000 people are struggling to survive in East Aleppo. They live amid ruins, with no water, no electricity, very little food, while the bombs continue to fall. We're on board Dignity 1, one of the 3 boats helping Médecins Sans Fronteiras to rescue men, women and children risking their lives to cross the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. Over 10,000 migrants were rescued off the coast of Libya on the 3rd and 4th of October, the most wretched record since the beginning of the migrant crisis. Working on board Borbonagos, Dignity 1 and the Aquarius, chartered by aid organisation SOS Méditerrâneo, MSF teams rescued almost 2,000 people in just 7 hours. Libya is a major gateway from the African continent to Europe. This Coast Guard works in the port of Zouara. The country is in crisis, and he and his colleagues are overwhelmed by the numbers of migrants attempting the crossing. They lack the necessary resources to go to their rescue. They don't have enough trained teams or serviceable boats.
We're
pretty much on our own. The Coast Guard Central Command are the only ones who can help us. We've told them time and time again that we need more patrol boats and more Coast Guards. We need more of everything to do our job properly.
Yet the situation is dire. Since the beginning of the year, 3,230 people have died in the Mediterranean, now the world's most deadly migrant route. The purpose of a clinical trial is to establish the effectiveness and safety of a new drug or vaccine. This is a critical phase to obtain approval for a new drug and to make it accessible worldwide. Clinical trials don't always involve new molecules or drugs. They are also used to test a different use or a new combination of existing drugs. The number of participants, the use of a placebo or not, depend on the research question and clinical hypothesis. All participants in a clinical trial must give their informed consent. Recruited on a voluntary basis, they are made aware of all potential risks. After a preclinical phase that includes laboratory tests on animals, the drugs undergo a series of tests in several phases. Phase 1 tests are usually conducted on a small number of healthy volunteers. The aim is to verify whether the drug is safe and to determine the most effective dosage. Phase 2 tests require a larger group of patients and are used to determine the effectiveness of the drug. For example, does it stop the disease spreading or cause it to recede even? If these 2 test phases are successful, it's time to proceed to Phase 3 tests, which compare new treatments to the standard treatment. This phase can involve hundreds or thousands of patients in several countries. If the tested treatment performs better than the existing one, it may go on to become the standard treatment. Take the example of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, a form of tuberculosis standard treatments are no longer effective against. In recent years, 2 new drugs have been developed, bedaquiline and delamanid. The purpose of the NTB project's clinical trial run by Médicos Sem Fronteiras and its partners, is to assess various combinations of these new and existing drugs and to identify a more effective, shorter and simpler treatment with fewer side effects. NTB is conducting a phase 3 clinical trial. The trial will take 4 years and involve 750 patients in 5 countries. An institutional ethics committee has approved the protocol, as have ethics committees in every NTB country. All participants are adult patients. They will each be randomly assigned to one of 5 experimental combinations over a 9-month period, or to the standard 20-month treatment. And the results will be compared. Each patient will be monitored very closely. As the trial progresses, the likelihood of a new patient being assigned to this or that treatment will evolve depending on the results. Should the clinical trial identify more effective and safer treatments, this would revolutionize the treatment of different forms of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis.
I think the most striking thing for me, and the most obvious thing, even when you enter Maiduguri, when you first arrive there from the airport, is the number of women and the number of children you see. Maiduguri is a city of children. They're wandering around and roaming around everywhere, and these children are either from a female-headed household, or they've been dislocated, they can't find their families, or they're orphans. So there are many, many children in Maiduguri, and there are many, many women. It's notable because you do not see that many men, although that is slowly changing. And the reason for this is either the men have been killed, kidnapped, or sometimes interred by the Nigerian army as suspects of being with Boko Haram, or they've run away. And a lot of them, because a lot of these people have fled fighting when the Boko Haram have attacked their villages, the families have been separated as well. So you have a lot of families trying to find each other as well. And the United Nations, I think, do have some kind of a scheme to try and reunite families. But it's very striking that you see women and children everywhere more than what you do men.